USS England, the 12-day hunt. Across the endless expanse of the Pacific during the Second World War, where nations gambled their futures amid vast blue horizons and battles decided empires, one small, unassuming ship would carve its name into naval history. It was neither a mighty battleship nor a famous carrier, but a humble destroyer escort. In less than 2 weeks, it would accomplish a feat no other vessel before or since has repeated. This is the story of USS England, DE 635, whose relentless pursuit of the enemy between May 19 and May 31, 1944, changed the very nature of submarine warfare. In those 12 days, England hunted down and destroyed 6 Japanese submarines, one after another, each kill more improbable than the last. Her success was not the product of chance or blind aggression, but the precise intersection of technological innovation, intelligence brilliance, and the steadfast courage of her crew. The saga of USS England stands as a demonstration of what could happen when human determination and scientific progress converged at the perfect moment. The chain of events that led to England's triumph began far from the open ocean, not with gunfire or explosions, but with the quiet tapping of code machines inside a low, anonymous building in Pearl Harbor. There, at the Fleet Radio Unit Pacific, or FUPAC, the successor to Commander Joseph Rochefort's famed Station Hypo, American cryptanalysts intercepted what appeared to be a routine Japanese Navy transmission. On May 13, 1944, a message sent from submarine I-16 to the commander of Submarine Division 7 detailed a scheduled arrival near Bougainville at 2200 hours on May 22. To ordinary ears, it was little more than a logistical update, but to trained cryptographers, it was the key to unlocking an opportunity, the chance to cripple an entire Japanese reconnaissance line. This single message represented the culmination of years of secret labor. Since the first months of the Pacific War, American codebreakers, linguists, mathematicians, and puzzle solvers had been working tirelessly to penetrate the Japanese naval code JN-25. Their tools were primitive by modern standards: IBM tabulators, reams of punched cards, and analytical notebooks filled with numeric permutations. Yet, from these monotonous details came breakthroughs that had already altered the war's course, most famously at Midway and in the Solomon Islands. But never before had decrypted intelligence been employed so directly and decisively in the hunt for enemy submarines. Decoding a JN-25 message demanded more than mathematical skill. It required cultural insight, linguistic subtlety, and relentless patience. Every signal had to be captured, logged, and analyzed for patterns before being reconstructed into intelligible text, a process combining machinery and intuition in equal measure. Once decrypted, this precious intelligence was relayed to Admiral Halsey's 3rd Fleet and from there to Commander Hamilton Haines, who led Escort Division 39, then stationed at Tulagi in the south. By mid-1944, Japan's naval situation was dire. Its carrier fleet, once the pride of the empire, had been shattered. Island strongholds across the Pacific were being isolated and starved of supplies. In this grim context, submarines represented the Imperial Navy's last viable means of gathering intelligence and harassing Allied operations. The NA line was a desperate attempt to maintain strategic awareness in a war that was rapidly turning against them. What neither Japanese command nor the submariners of the NA line could foresee was that a single American escort group, guided by the fruits of code breaking and armed with new technology, was already moving to intercept them. Within days, the USS England and her sister ships would begin a relentless hunt that would enter naval legend, a demonstration of precision warfare born not from luck, but from preparation, cooperation, and the quiet genius of those who fought their battles not with guns, but with logic and cipher wheels. In the early months of 1944, as the tides of the Pacific War began to shift irreversibly in favor of the Allies, the Imperial Japanese Navy sought to restore a semblance of control through an ambitious yet flawed defensive strategy. Among its final large-scale measures was the creation of the NA Line, a string of submarines positioned across the Western Pacific intended to serve as an early warning barrier against American carrier movements. Each submarine was tasked with maintaining a fixed patrol area, transmitting reports of any detected enemy presence. The system, rigid and inflexible by design, would soon expose one of Japan's greatest strategic miscalculations. Unlike the U.S. Navy's fluid patrol doctrines that allowed submarine captains to adapt dynamically to changing conditions, Japan's plan relied on strict adherence to assigned coordinates. This doctrinal rigidity, meant to ensure coordination, would instead become a fatal weakness. At the time, Japanese naval intelligence had concluded that Western New Guinea was the likely next target of General Douglas MacArthur's advancing forces. Based on these assessments, Admiral Soemu Toyoda, Commander-in-Chief of the Combined Fleet, initiated Operation A-Go, envisioned as the decisive confrontation that would halt the Allied advance and preserve Japan's defensive perimeter, stretching from the Marianas through the Western Caroline Islands to the shores of New Guinea. However, Operation A-Go would become a turning point not of triumph but of collapse. The ensuing engagements, particularly the Battle of the Philippine Sea in June 1944, would lead to catastrophic Japanese losses, including 3 aircraft carriers and hundreds of irreplaceable aviators. The event, remembered as the Marianas Turkey Shoot, exposed the crumbling state of Japan's naval air power.
By 1944, Japan's naval aviation had been hollowed out. The elite pilots who had once dominated the Pacific skies, veterans of Midway, Santa Cruz, and the Eastern Solomons, were gone. Their replacements, rushed through shortened training programs, lacked the precision, discipline, and experience of their predecessors. Meanwhile, American pilot training had evolved into a vast industrial system, producing thousands of proficient aviators every few months. The balance of skill and technology had decisively shifted. The equipment gap was equally stark. American F-6F Hellcat fighters now outclassed their Japanese counterparts in speed, armor, and firepower. U.S. ships, bristling with radar-guided anti-aircraft weapons, could defend themselves with lethal efficiency. Attacking an American task force had become nearly suicidal. In support of Operation A-Go, Vice Admiral Takeo Tagagi, commanding the 6th Fleet's submarine arm, ordered the establishment of the NA Scouting Line, a defensive screen of 7 submarines drawn from the 7th Submarine Squadron. Tagagi, a career submariner who had witnessed Japan's early underwater supremacy erode, faced an increasingly desperate situation. At the start of the war, Japan's submarines had been among the world's finest, manned by highly skilled crews and armed with advanced torpedoes. But years of relentless attrition had taken their toll. Losses were mounting faster than replacements could be trained, and the doctrine that prioritized attacks on enemy warships rather than on merchant shipping had proven strategically disastrous. While American submarines were systematically cutting Japan's supply arteries, the Imperial Navy's undersea fleet was being hunted into extinction, expending its dwindling strength on engagements that offered little strategic payoff. Tagagi's decision to anchor his remaining submarines to fixed grid points across the NA line sealed their fate. The chain of events that doomed these vessels began when Japanese forces intercepted a routine American aircraft contact report near submarine RO-104. Believing the intelligence credible, Japanese command sent out a fleet-wide order directing every submarine in the NA line to adjust position 60 nautical miles to the southeast. Crucially, This transmission, encrypted in the Japanese Navy's JN-25 code, was swiftly intercepted by American signals intelligence. Analysts at the Joint Intelligence Center Pacific Ocean Area, or JICPOA, and cryptographers from the Fleet Radio Unit Pacific, or FRUPAC, immediately set to work decrypting it. The process required not only code-breaking expertise, but also intimate familiarity with Japanese coordinate mapping systems and operational procedures. After hours of meticulous effort, U.S. cryptanalysts successfully extracted the exact positions of every submarine in the NA line. For the first time in the Pacific War, such ultra-sensitive intelligence was sanitized, stripped of any indication of its origin, and shared directly with frontline anti-submarine forces. The decision marked a watershed moment in wartime intelligence cooperation.
The decrypted data proved astonishingly precise. Each Japanese submarine was found within roughly 50 nautical miles, often even closer, to the decoded coordinates. The choice to act on this intelligence carried immense risk. If the Japanese suspected their codes were compromised, they might immediately switch encryption systems, erasing a critical Allied advantage. To conceal the true source of the information, American commanders devised elaborate cover stories. Reports of submarine sightings were attributed to aerial patrols or chance radar detections. Even the crews of the hunter-killer destroyer escorts who would carry out the attacks were told their targets had been spotted by aircraft, unaware that their every move was guided by top-secret intelligence breakthroughs. The task group chosen for the mission consisted of 3 Buckley-class destroyer escorts, the USS George, DE-697, USS Raby, DE-698, and USS England, DE-635. These ships were the product of America's massive wartime shipbuilding surge. Smaller and more economical than fleet destroyers, they were designed specifically for anti-submarine warfare. Their construction balanced performance with mass production, allowing them to be built rapidly in commercial shipyards by a largely unskilled labor force. Despite their compact size, Buckley-class escorts were formidable submarine hunters. Equipped with sonar, radar, depth charges, and the revolutionary Hedgehog anti-submarine mortar, they were deadly opponents for any underwater adversary. Their diesel-electric propulsion granted long operational endurance, essential for patrols across the vast Pacific. Each vessel bore the name of an American serviceman who had fallen in combat, symbolizing the nation's enduring resolve. In the days to come, these modest warships, guided by intelligence born of patience and ingenuity, would make naval history, dismantling Japan's submarine line one vessel at a time and demonstrating how the fusion of technology, training, and information could decisively alter the course of war. The naming of America's Buckley-class destroyer escorts carried a meaning far deeper than ceremonial tradition. Each vessel bore not just a name, but a legacy, a constant reminder to its crew that their service continued the story of men who had given everything for their country. These ships were living memorials, symbols of sacrifice intended to inspire courage and duty in every sailor who stepped aboard. The USS George was named by Seaman Second Class Eugene F. George, who had distinguished himself during the fierce night action off Guadalcanal on November 12, 1942. Serving as an anti-aircraft gunner aboard the heavy cruiser USS San Francisco, George faced one of the most brutal surface battles of the war. The engagement was fought at such close range that ships fired at the flashes of enemy guns in the darkness. During the chaos, a flaming Japanese G-4M Betty bomber, already crippled by anti-aircraft fire, dove deliberately toward the San Francisco in a desperate suicide strike. George and his gun crew refused to abandon their post, continuing to fire as the aircraft bore down upon them. The bomber smashed into the cruiser's bridge, killing Admiral Daniel Callahan and much of his staff, but the gunners had stood firm until the end. For his valor, Eugene George was posthumously awarded the Navy Cross, and his name would live on through the ship that carried it into battle. The USS Raby honored Rear Admiral James Joseph Raby, a pioneer of convoy escort operations during World War I. As a commander of the first American protected convoy across the Atlantic, Raby helped develop the foundational principles of anti-submarine warfare, coordinated escorts, disciplined formation keeping, and the aggressive pursuit of submarine threats. His innovations had demonstrated that merchant fleets could survive the U-boat menace if properly defended. Though his life was tragically cut short in 1934 in an automobile accident while serving as commandant of the Charleston Naval District, his work laid the groundwork for the Allied success in the Battle of the Atlantic. The destroyer escort that bore his name would continue the fight he had begun decades earlier.
Among these vessels, however, USS England, DE 635, carried a particularly poignant story. She was named for Ensign John Charles England, a 20-year-old naval officer who perished aboard the USS Oklahoma during the attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941. Only days away from his 21st birthday, England had swapped duty shifts that morning to allow a friend more time with his family. He was eagerly awaiting the arrival of his wife and infant daughter, a child he had never met. When Japanese torpedoes ripped through the Oklahoma's hull, the battleship began to capsize. England initially escaped to the upper deck, only to find chaos and carnage all around. Oil-slicked waters burning, sailors thrown overboard, enemy aircraft strafing survivors. Yet when he realized that several men remained trapped in the radio room below, he made the selfless decision to go back. 3 times he plunged into the flooding compartments, each time bringing trapped sailors to safety through dark, debris-filled corridors. On his 4th descent, he never returned. Ensign England became one of 429 men who went down with the Oklahoma that morning. The disaster was one of Pearl Harbor's darkest episodes. For days afterward, faint tapping was heard from within the overturned hull as trapped men tried to signal rescuers. 32 were eventually freed, but hundreds more, including John England, could not be reached in time. Initially interred among the unidentified dead at Punchbowl National Cemetery, his remains remained unknown for decades until DNA testing in 2016 confirmed his identity. He was finally laid to rest beside his parents in Colorado Springs, closing a chapter that had remained open for 75 years. Though he was awarded only the Purple Heart, his courage in returning again and again to save others ensured that his memory would be immortalized through not one, but 2 ships, the destroyer escort USS England DE 635 and the later guided missile cruiser USS England CG-22. The ships themselves were technological marvels for their time. The Buckley-class destroyer escorts had been engineered specifically to hunt submarines across the vast expanses of the Atlantic and Pacific. Armed with 3 3-inch guns for surface combat, they were lightly equipped for ship-to-ship engagements, by design. Their true lethality lay in their anti-submarine arsenal. Each carried a triple bank of 21-inch torpedo tubes, stern-mounted depth charge racks, 8 K-gun projectors capable of launching charges to both sides, and most importantly, the revolutionary Mark X Hedgehog anti-submarine mortar. The Hedgehog transformed undersea warfare. Traditional depth charges detonated at preset depths, often after a submarine had slipped away. In contrast, the Hedgehog launched a cluster of small contact-fused bombs that exploded only upon striking a target. This not only revealed immediate success or failure, but allowed attacks without losing sonar contact, a critical improvement in sub-hunting tactics. Developed in 1941 by Britain's Directorate of Miscellaneous Weapons Development and deployed the following year,
The Hedgehog became a game-changer once it reached American service in late 1943. Its adoption coincided with the rise of purpose-built escort ships like the Buckley class, fast, durable, and equipped with long-range sonar systems capable of detecting submarines hidden beneath the waves. The Buckleys embodied lessons learned from the Battle of the Atlantic. In the Buckley class, those lessons were realized. Mass-produced in American shipyards using modular construction techniques, these ships could be assembled quickly and efficiently by a workforce of civilians new to naval building. Yet despite their utilitarian origins, they were among the most effective anti-submarine platforms ever created. As the USS England, USS Raby, and USS George prepared to sail into the Pacific in May 1944, they carried not only the weight of their namesake's legacies, but the cutting edge of Allied naval innovation. Their story would soon become legend, proof that courage, technology, and intelligence could combine to achieve the impossible in the unforgiving arena of war at sea. The creation of the Hedgehog weapon was not born from calm innovation, but from desperation. In 1941 and 1942, Britain's survival hung by a thread as German U-boats prowled the Atlantic, destroying merchant convoys faster than shipyards could replace them. Each loss tightened the noose around the island nation. Out of this crisis came a radical idea, a forward-firing anti-submarine weapon that would strike before a ship passed over its prey. The Hedgehog launcher carried 24 small projectiles, arranged in 6 neat rows of 4, mounted on a rotating platform that could be aimed toward an enemy contact. When fired, the bombs arced forward and fell into the sea about 200 to 300 yards ahead, landing in a deadly oval spread roughly 140 feet long and 120 feet wide. Each projectile weighed 65 pounds and packed a 35-pound charge of TNT, or the more powerful Torpex explosive. When viewed fully loaded, the launcher's protruding spigots resembled the quills of a hedgehog, a harmless name for a profoundly lethal invention. What truly changed naval warfare, however, wasn't its shape, but its fuse. Unlike the conventional depth charge, which detonated automatically at a preset depth whether it hit anything or not, each Hedgehog bomb exploded only on direct contact with a solid surface. This single innovation overturned decades of anti-submarine tactics and solved 2 long-standing problems that had frustrated surface fleets since the First World War. First, the results of an attack were immediately clear. If a projectile struck a submarine, the explosion was unmistakable. If the sea remained quiet, the target was still alive. Commanders no longer had to wait the long, anxious 20 minutes once required to see if oil, wreckage, or bodies rose to the surface. Even better, the Hedgehog could be reloaded in about 3 minutes, a fraction of the time needed to reset traditional depth charge racks. Rapid, repeated attacks became possible, preventing submarines from escaping during long reload intervals. The second, and perhaps most revolutionary advantage, was in sonar continuity. Traditional depth charges, even when they missed, created immense underwater shockwaves that temporarily blinded sonar operators. The roar of detonations and the turbulence of rising bubbles scattered sound waves, making it impossible to track the enemy for up to 15 minutes. The Hedgehog changed this dynamic completely. If no projectiles made contact, there were no explosions, meaning sonar remained crystal clear. The attacking ship could keep its acoustic lock on the submarine and instantly adjust for another strike. Psychologically, too, the Hedgehog rewrote the script of undersea warfare. Depth charge barrages had a brutal, chaotic quality, rolling thunder beneath the sea that shattered nerves but often spared the submarine itself. The Hedgehog was quiet, methodical, and merciless.
submarine crews often never realized they were under attack until the first impact struck their hull. From the moment the projectiles left the launcher, they took roughly 7 seconds to reach a depth of 200 feet. There was no time to dive deeper, turn sharply, or deploy countermeasures.
Veteran submarine captains had once relied on the predictable patterns of depth charge attacks. They could calculate when they had slipped beneath the attacking ship's sonar and perform desperate maneuvers to escape. But against the Hedgehog, there was no warning, no rhythm, no sound. It struck from silence, and that silence proved deadly. Wartime statistics later revealed just how effective it was. British naval analyses showed that, on average, 60 traditional depth charge attacks were required to sink a single submarine. Early in the war, this number sometimes climbed above 100. With the Hedgehog, that ratio plummeted. Only 5 or 6 attacks were needed per confirmed kill, a 10-fold increase in success. Even though each individual bomb carried less explosive force than a depth charge, the direct impact on a submarine's pressure hull was catastrophic. 1 or 2 hits were usually enough to rupture the steel shell, flooding the interior and sending the vessel to the seabed. The localized blast, concentrated directly against the hull, was far more destructive than a near miss, whose shockwave merely rocked the submarine. The Japanese submarine I-16, which would soon find itself the target of such weapons, was far from ordinary. Measuring 358 feet from bow to stern and displacing over 3,500 tons when submerged, it was one of the largest and most sophisticated submarines in the Imperial Navy. The vessel was of the Type C-1 class, powerful long-range boats designed to carry a smaller 2-man midget submarine on their decks for special missions. I-16's career was both remarkable and tragic. It had already completed 9 patrols by the time it encountered Allied anti-submarine forces and held a unique place in naval history. It had launched the very first submarine attack of the Pacific War. In the early hours before the infamous air assault on Pearl Harbor, I-16, under Lieutenant Junior Grade Masaharu Yokoyama, released its midget submarine into the dark waters off Oahu at 0042 on December 7, 1941. The plan was daring, even visionary. Japan had secretly developed these tiny craft to slip into enemy harbors, fire torpedoes at anchored warships, and vanish into the depths. 5 massive mother submarines, including I-16, carried these miniature vessels across the Pacific to Hawaii. The operation, however, met disaster. Though I-16 received what were believed to be 2 faint radio signals later that day, one claiming a successful attack and another, hours later, reporting navigational failure, none of the midget submarines returned. American records and post-war analysis later showed that none had struck their targets. One was sunk by the destroyer USS Ward, which fired the first American shots of the Pacific War. Another was rammed and destroyed by USS Monaghan inside the harbor. A third ran aground, and its surviving crewman became the first Japanese prisoner of war captured by the United States. The remaining 2 simply vanished beneath the waves, their fate unknown. Out of 10 men who crewed the 5 midget submarines, only 1 survived. Despite this failure, I-16 would later redeem its reputation. 6 months after Pearl Harbor, on May 30, 1942, the submarine operated in the Indian Ocean, stalking British forces near Diego Suarez, Madagascar. From its deck, it launched another midget submarine under Ensign Iwasa Katsusuke. This time, the mission would not end in silence. The midget submarine launched from I-16 managed to slip.
In the same engagement, the submarine also sank the tanker British Loyalty before disappearing with all hands. The Diego Suarez operation marked the high point of Japan's special submarine warfare program, daring
innovative and devastating when it worked, but almost always fatal for the crews who carried out such missions. As the war shifted to the South Pacific, I-16 was drawn into the brutal struggle for the Solomon Islands. During the Guadalcanal campaign, the submarine undertook a series of dangerous resupply operations to isolated Japanese garrisons, ferrying ammunition, medicine, and food through waters dominated by Allied aircraft and destroyers. The Imperial Navy called this desperate effort the Tokyo Express, a last attempt to sustain their troops after surface convoys became too costly to operate. On November 28, 1942, I-16 launched a midget submarine designated H-10, which successfully torpedoed the American cargo vessel USS Alekba. The explosion set off her fuel and ammunition stores, forcing the crew to beach the ship to prevent her from sinking. Alekba burned for days but was later salvaged and returned to service. By early 1943, I-16 was assigned to cover the Japanese evacuation of Guadalcanal and continued supply runs to stranded units in New Guinea. Despite surviving a minor air attack later that year, the submarine's fortunes were declining along with Japan's war effort. The once proud fleet submarines that had prowled the oceans at the start of the war were now reduced to hauling sacks of rice and medicine to starving island garrisons. Each mission meant running a deadly gauntlet of Allied air patrols and radar-equipped ships for the meager reward of delivering a few tons of supplies to soldiers who were already doomed. Yet, bound by their code of duty, Japanese naval commanders persisted. Abandoning a garrison was unthinkable while even a single submarine could still sail. On May 14, 1944, I-16 departed Truk Lagoon under the command of Lieutenant Commander Takayuchi Yoshitaka. Her holds were filled not with torpedoes, but with 75 rubber bags of rice, desperately needed provisions for the marooned Japanese forces at Bouin on Bougainville Island. Those troops, more than 40,000 men, had been cut off since November 1943. Starvation, malaria, and exhaustion had decimated them. Reports even spoke of cannibalism among the dying. Unbeknownst to the crew of I-16, their departure message had been intercepted and decrypted by American intelligence. A U.S. hunter-killer group, 3 destroyer escorts, was already converging on the area. On the afternoon of May 19, 1944, a Navy patrol aircraft, a consolidated PBY Catalina, sighted I-16 cruising on the surface north of Bougainville. This sighting confirmed the intelligence reports. The Japanese submarine was exposed, running on diesel engines to recharge her batteries and gain speed toward her destination. Japanese subs of this era were handicapped by slow underwater performance and limited battery life, forcing them to surface frequently, where they were vulnerable to detection by radar and aircraft. The 3 American escorts quickly shifted into formation, spreading out into a line abreast to maximize sonar coverage. This coordinated sweep created a wall of sound that few submarines could evade. At 13:35 hours, sonar operators aboard the destroyer escort USS England picked up a contact, a solid, unmistakable echo at a range of roughly 1,350 yards. Somewhere below, I-16 was maneuvering for her life. Lieutenant Commander Takayuchi immediately initiated evasive maneuvers, executing a series of rapid depth changes and erratic turns. Japanese submarine doctrine emphasized 3-dimensional tactics, shifting both course and depth to confuse attackers and break sonar contact. Clouds of bubbles were released to create false echoes. Inside the submarine, 106 men endured the shuddering of sudden dives and tight turns as they tried to shake off their pursuers. On the surface, Lieutenant Commander Pendleton, commanding USS.
For the next hour, the 2 opponents engaged in a deadly underwater chess match. I-16 continued her evasive dance, changing depth, releasing decoys, and twisting through thermal layers that distorted sonar waves. On England's 3rd run, 1 Hedgehog projectile struck home. The explosion shook I-16 violently, hurling crewmen against bulkheads, shattering instruments, and plunging compartments into darkness. But the submarine held together. Damage control teams rushed to seal leaks as Takayuchi fought to keep the vessel under control. Pendleton, refusing to relent, ordered a 4th attack, but again the target escaped destruction,
By now, the tension aboard England was electric. The men knew they had their quarry trapped, but it seemed impossible to deliver the fatal blow. Every failed attack raised the stakes. The longer I-16 survived, the greater her chance to slip away. Then came the fifth run. The crew of England had studied I-16's movements and recognized a pattern, a tendency to turn to port when diving and to stabilize within certain depth bands. This time, they adjusted their firing solution accordingly. At 14:35 hours, the Hedgehog launchers roared again. Seconds later, a series of massive detonations tore through the sea. The explosions were so intense that England's stern lifted clear of the water, slamming sailors off their feet and rattling the ship from bow to stern. Moments later, silence returned, and then the ocean began to tell the story. 20 minutes after the attack, patches of oil, fragments of wood, cork insulation, and torn rice bags floated to the surface. There was no doubt left. I-16 and her 106-man crew had been destroyed. Amid the floating wreckage, sailors aboard the destroyer escorts discovered haunting traces of human life. A single cap marked with kanji, fragments of a Japanese diary swollen with seawater, and a wooden sandal drifting aimlessly among the oil and debris. These were the final echoes of men who had once crewed the submarine that had fired one of the first torpedoes at Pearl Harbor. Now, that very submarine lay silent beneath the waves, entombing all 107 of its crew, including Lieutenant Commander Takeuchi. Their final mission, delivering sacks of rice to an isolated garrison, ended in tragedy. Ironically, the troops they sought to save would later surrender when the war itself came to its inevitable conclusion. While I-16 met her fate, another group of submarines was already on the move. Around May 17, 1944, 7 submarines of what the Japanese Navy called the NA Line departed Saipan to take up their assigned patrol stations. Before leaving port, a solemn departure ceremony was held, personally overseen by Vice Admiral Takagi. The commanders were addressed with words of devotion to the emperor, each handed a ceremonial cup of sake and a traditional white headband adorned with patriotic slogans. Though the rituals invoked honor and courage, every man present understood the grim odds ahead. By this point in the war, American anti-submarine tactics had advanced far beyond what Japanese crews could effectively counter. The 7 vessels were all of the RO class, compact Type RO-100 coastal submarines, each displacing roughly 760 tons. Far smaller than fleet boats like I-16, these submarines were fitted with 4 forward torpedo tubes, 8 torpedoes in total, and a single 76mm deck gun. The design reflected Japan's pre-war philosophy of craftsmanship and individual excellence, prioritizing build quality over mass production. But in a war increasingly defined by numbers, such a philosophy proved disastrous. American submarines built in vast quantities.
The first to fall from the NA line was RO-106, a boat with an already notable combat history. On July 18, 1943, during the bitter Solomon Islands campaign, she torpedoed the American tank landing ship LST-342 in Blanche Channel near New Georgia. The hit ignited the ship's ammunition stores, triggering a catastrophic explosion that split the vessel in two. The stern sank immediately while the forward section drifted and was later towed to shore. The blast claimed 121 lives, including the ship's entire mess division of African-American stewards and cooks, as well as Lieutenant Commander McClellan Barkley, an artist who had created some of the most recognizable U.S. recruitment posters before volunteering for frontline duty. RO-106 survived several close calls afterward, including serious damage from aerial depth charges in late 1943. After extensive repairs, she returned to action. In the early morning darkness of May 22, 1944, at approximately 3:50 a.m., radar operators aboard the destroyer escort USS George detected a surface contact. It was RO-106, running on the surface to recharge her batteries under cover of night, a necessary but perilous task. Her radar detector had malfunctioned, leaving her blind to George's approach.
A 24-inch searchlight cut through the darkness, flooding the sea with blinding white light and catching the submarine off guard. The sudden glare would have temporarily blinded the lookouts on RO-106's bridge, who had been relying solely on night vision. The Japanese crew reacted instantly, initiating an emergency dive. Within moments, the bridge was sealed and the submarine began slipping beneath the waves, but not fast enough. At 4:15 a.m., George launched a salvo of Hedgehog depth charges, which missed as the submarine twisted violently to evade. 10 minutes later, USS England, operating nearby, gained a firm sonar lock on the fleeing target. The submarine dove deeper, turning erratically and altering speed in an effort to escape. England's first Hedgehog salvo missed, but then the Japanese commander made a fateful decision. RO-106 reversed course and began to close distance with England, likely intending to fire torpedoes. But this maneuver unintentionally placed the submarine directly in the path of England's next attack. Unlike traditional depth charges dropped aft, Hedgehogs projected forward, detonating only upon contact with a target. Unaware of this, the submarine's maneuver effectively sealed its fate. England's second salvo struck home. Multiple contact explosions tore through the submarine's pressure hull. The resulting implosion sent shockwaves through the vessel, bulkheads buckling, machinery exploding in sparks, and seawater rushing in with crushing force. Within moments, RO-106 broke apart and sank to the seabed with all 49 men aboard. The entire encounter, from first radar contact to destruction, lasted only 36 minutes. The following day brought another engagement. This time the victim was RO-104, commanded by Lieutenant Hisashi Izubuchi. Unlike many of her sister ships, RO-104 had previously operated in the icy waters of the North Pacific and the Aleutian Islands, a stark contrast to the tropical seas where she now patrolled. Earlier in the war, these northern patrols had primarily been reconnaissance missions, occasionally targeting shipping between the United States and the Soviet Union. During the Solomon Islands operations in late 1943, RO-104 performed a daring rescue on November 3rd, saving 75 survivors from the light cruiser Sendai, which had been sunk during the Battle of Empress Augusta Bay. Conducted under the
At dawn on May 23, 1944, the calm waters north of New Ireland were broken by the appearance of a dark silhouette. An Allied reconnaissance aircraft, patrolling roughly 250 nautical miles northwest of Kavieng, spotted a Japanese submarine running on the surface, RO-104. This time, her radar detector was functioning, its alarm shrieking a warning just moments before the pilot sighted her visually. The submarine's watch crew reacted instantly. Within seconds, she slipped beneath the surface, vanishing before the nearby destroyer escorts could close the distance. Once submerged, Lieutenant Izubuchi, commanding RO-104, began an exhausting duel of nerves. He ordered radical turns, rapid dives, and deceptive maneuvers, every evasion technique drilled into Japanese submarine crews through years of wartime experience. The first to attack was the USS Raby, whose sonar operators tracked fleeting echoes in the depths. RO-104, however, proved a far more elusive opponent than her lost sisters. The submarine deployed a clever countermeasure, an early form of acoustic deception. It emitted bursts of carefully tuned sound waves to confuse and overload the American sonar, creating false targets in the water. The ruse worked brilliantly. Over the course of 2 tense hours, Raby launched 4 separate Hedgehog attacks, each one missing completely as the Japanese submarine danced through the ocean depths, her hull groaning under the strain of shark maneuvers. When Raby broke off, the USS George moved in. Her crew, determined to finish what Raby had started, conducted 5 consecutive attack runs, but each time the sonar contact vanished at the crucial moment. The Japanese captain fought with extraordinary skill, exploiting every thermal layer, every current, every trick that might buy his crew another minute of life. But each dive drained the batteries further, and every evasion fouled the air with more carbon dioxide. Inside the cramped steel tube, the men were gasping in the stifling heat, their oxygen thinning with every turn of the propellers. Finally, at 0819 hours,
The destroyer escort USS England took over. Her sonar operators had been tracking the Japanese boat for hours, carefully studying her escape patterns. They noted the telltale habits, the tendency to roll to starboard during a dive, the preference for depths around 200 to 250 feet, and the quick acceleration before each sudden turn. On England's second attack run, the crew acted on those observations. They adjusted their fire control data and released a carefully timed hedgehog pattern. Between 10 and 12 projectiles struck home. What followed was a series of deep, muffled detonations, the sea itself seeming to convulse. Through the headphones, sonar operators heard the unmistakable sounds, the tearing of metal under pressure, the concussive roar of collapsing compartments, and then silence. By 10:45 a.m., the ocean gave up its grim confirmation. Pieces of wood and cork, fragments of clothing, and a widening slick of oil floated to the surface. Among the wreckage drifted a single life ring stenciled with Japanese characters, undeniable proof of the kill. RO-104 and all 58 of her crew were gone. The hunter-killer group had proven its deadly effectiveness. In just 4 days, the coordinated effort of England, George, and Raby had destroyed 3 enemy submarines. Yet their mission was far from finished.
The next morning, May 24, 1944, brought another contact, another hunt, and another tragedy for the Imperial Japanese Navy. The new target was RO-116, commanded by Lieutenant Commander Shibuya Kuno, a relatively fresh officer leading a crew on only their second war patrol. The submarine had been commissioned barely 6 months earlier, and many of her sailors were newly graduated from the submarine school at Kude. Young and idealistic, they had entered the war believing in valor and glory, only to find themselves facing the relentless efficiency of American anti-submarine warfare. Shortly after midnight, at 0020 hours, radar operators aboard the USS George detected a distant contact, an extraordinary 17,000 yards away, roughly 10 miles. Atmospheric conditions were perfect, allowing radar waves to travel farther than usual. RO-116 was caught unawares. She began a crash dive, but her descent was sluggish, the product of an inexperienced crew still learning to handle their boat under pressure. At 0105 a.m., George regained sonar contact at only 750 yards. The Japanese submarine responded with desperation. Abrupt rudder shifts, steep depth changes, and bursts of sonar interference meant to confuse the pursuers. For nearly an hour, the battle played out unseen beneath the surface, the submarine twisting, the destroyer circling, both sides fighting for survival. George's attacks failed, and England moved in to deliver the coup de grace. Her first 2 hedgehog runs had to be aborted when sonar contact broke unexpectedly. But the destroyer's sonar team, experienced and calm, soon detected a pattern. Small hesitations in RO-116's maneuvers that revealed inexperience. The Japanese crew's evasions had become repetitive and their reaction time slower. On England's third attack, the prediction was perfect. At 0214 hours, at least 3 projectiles hit the target. There was no massive detonation, only a dull, heavy rumble followed by silence. The absence of secondary explosions suggested that the submarine's torpedoes had not ignited, likely because the hits struck outside the warhead compartment. Within moments, RO-116 broke apart and sank, taking all 56 sailors down with her into the blackness below. 2 days later, on May 26th, the Allied task force detected yet another contact, RO-108, commanded by Lieutenant Owari Konishi. Unlike the rookie crews before her, this submarine was a battle-tested veteran. She had already demonstrated her lethality months earlier. On October 3, 1943, while patrolling the waters of Huon Gulf off New Guinea, RO-108 detected a group of 3 American destroyers using their own sonar pings. Skillfully positioning herself for attack, she fired a spread of 4 torpedoes in a perfect textbook salvo. USS Smith spotted the torpedo wakes in time and narrowly avoided destruction. But USS Henley was less fortunate. 2 torpedoes struck her port side amidships, one detonating near the forward boiler room. The explosions broke the ship's back, fuel tanks ruptured, fire spread instantly, and the destroyer split in 2. Henley went down quickly, taking 15 men with her and injuring 52 others. Though Smith and USS Reed counterattacked with depth charges, RO-108 managed to escape, diving deep and running silent until the Americans lost contact. But fate would not always favor her. On December 17, 1943, while recharging on the surface, RO-108 was caught by a PBY Catalina patrol aircraft. The flying boat's depth charges slammed into the sea around her, one exploding close enough to tear open hull plates near the stern. The submarine began to flood, her stern sinking lower with each passing minute. Through remarkable effort, her crew...
The initial attack was assigned to Raby. She maneuvered into firing position and launched her first spread of Hedgehog projectiles, but the salvo failed to connect. RO-108 had turned sharply inside Raby's attack path, a risky yet expertly timed defensive maneuver that momentarily saved her. At 11:23 p.m., England took over the assault. The engagement that followed would be brief and decisive. On her first attack run, England's sonar operators tracked the submarine's evasive turns with precision, and her Hedgehog mortars struck home. Between 4 and 6 of the projectiles detonated in quick succession, producing a cluster of underwater explosions that ripped through RO-108's pressure hull. Already weakened from damage sustained in earlier encounters, the submarine could not endure the assault. Within moments, she broke apart and vanished beneath the waves, taking all 53 of her crew with her. By late May 1944, Japanese naval intelligence was beginning to realize something was terribly wrong. On May 27th, analysts at the 6th Fleet headquarters intercepted fragments of American naval traffic that hinted at a series of submarine losses north of the Admiralty Islands. The tone of the intercepted messages, described by Japanese intelligence officers as excessively confident, suggested the Americans were celebrating repeated successes in anti-submarine warfare. Although Japan's cryptographic units lacked the sophistication of the Allied codebreakers, they remained capable of partial decryptions and could identify patterns in enemy communications. Urgent warning messages were immediately dispatched to the remaining submarines of the NA patrol line. These alerts were sent across multiple radio frequencies and repeated several times to ensure they reached every vessel. RO-112 received the warning and withdrew from her assigned area, temporarily escaping destruction, though her survival would prove short-lived. On February 11, 1945, she was sunk with all 61 hands by USS Batfish off Luzon. RO-109 also managed to evade the danger, only to meet the same fate months later, when USS Horace A. Bass destroyed her near Okinawa on May 7, 1945. But not every submarine received the message. RO-105, commanded by Lieutenant Junichi Ino, either never heard the transmission or chose, for reasons lost to history, to hold her position. It is possible her radio equipment had been damaged, or that her captain felt bound by strict orders to maintain his post no matter the risk. Adding to the gravity of his decision, RO-105 carried Captain Ryunosuke Kato, commander of Submarine Division 51. The presence of such a senior officer aboard would have made any withdrawal from the assigned patrol area nearly unthinkable without direct authorization from higher command. RO-105 had departed Saipan on May 14, 1944, already a seasoned boat with several close encounters to her record. One of her most harrowing experiences had occurred the previous year, on August 13, 1933, when she narrowly evaded 2 torpedoes fired by USS Tarpon. The American submarine had executed a perfect stern attack, launching at close range. But sharp-eyed lookouts aboard RO-105 spotted the white torpedo wakes in time for a violent evasive maneuver. She dove hard and twisted away, the torpedoes slicing harmlessly past her hull. That escape had been a matter of seconds. Now, however, with the Allied hunter-killer group methodically eliminating one submarine after another,
RO-105's luck was running out. Her decision, or inability, to move would soon draw her into the same deadly net that had already claimed so many of her sister ships. In the late summer of 1943, the Japanese submarine RO-105 had already seen her share of peril. During one of her earlier patrols that September, she launched a spread of torpedoes at the light cruiser USS Columbia. The attack, though well-timed, ended in failure when the cruiser's sonar operators detected the incoming torpedoes and swiftly maneuvered clear. Despite such setbacks, RO-105 remained active in her duties, which occasionally included humanitarian efforts, rescuing stranded Japanese airmen shot down during operations in the Pacific. These missions were acts of courage as much as loyalty, since they often required the submarine to surface in broad daylight and linger dangerously close to enemy-controlled waters. Following the destruction of RO-108, the three American destroyer escorts, George, Raby, and England, found themselves running critically low on Hedgehog munitions. Their supply of anti-submarine projectiles had been almost entirely exhausted after days of relentless combat. The ships made for Seadler Harbor at Manus Island in the Admiralty Islands, where rearmament began the moment they arrived. The work was done with intense urgency. Crews labored through the night, knowing that every hour spent at anchor increased the chance that another Japanese submarine might slip away or strike at Allied shipping.
Once rearmed and resupplied, the trio rejoined a newly assembled hunter-killer task group that had moved into the area. This force was built around the escort carrier USS Hogget Bay and reinforced by several destroyers, Hazelwood, Herman, Hull, and McCord, as well as the destroyer escort Spangler. With the arrival of Hogget Bay's air wing, the anti-submarine effort gained a new dimension. Aircraft now swept vast sectors of ocean, locating targets and guiding surface warships toward enemy contacts. It was during the night of May 30th to 31st, 1944 that the next encounter began. Shortly after midnight, Hazelwood's radar operators picked up a faint contact, soon confirmed to be RO-105. The submarine reacted instantly, diving deep and initiating a sequence of evasive maneuvers that would continue for hours. What followed was one of the longest and most exhausting submarine hunts of the Pacific War. Lieutenant Eno, commanding RO-105, demonstrated extraordinary skill and determination. He used every trick available to him, ejecting oil slicks to feign mortal damage, releasing debris to confuse sonar readings, and maneuvering with such violence that his vessel's steel hull creaked under the stress. Throughout the night, several ships cycled through attack runs. Hazelwood maintained contact and dropped depth charges that sent towering plumes of water into the air, but none achieved a fatal hit. George followed with several hedgehog attacks and likely scored a few partial strikes, enough to wound the submarine and kill crew members, but not to destroy her. Remarkably, RO-105 refused to die. Her reinforced hull, divided into multiple watertight compartments, allowed her to survive damage that would have doomed a lesser craft. When dawn broke on May 31st, 1944, the sea appeared deceptively calm. An oil sheen spread across the surface, marking where the submarine had been hit, yet sonar still showed movement. The hunt continued. Spangler made a run but missed when RO-105 executed a last-second hard turn. Frustration rippled through the task group. Commander Walton B. "Poco" Haynes, aboard George, finally sent a terse radio message to England. "Oh hell, go ahead, England." The words would soon become part of naval legend. The order unleashed the most formidable hunter of them all. The crew of England, who had watched the long struggle from the sidelines, were ready. They had spent the night studying the submarine's movements and had noticed small but consistent behavioral patterns. A brief hesitation before course changes, a preference for certain depths, and predictable bursts of acceleration when cornered. At 7:36 a.m., England began her attack run. The sonar ping was strong and steady. Moments later, her Hedgehog launchers thundered, releasing a deadly pattern of explosives into the depths.
A few seconds passed, then came a colossal detonation. Between 6 and 10 projectiles found their mark, triggering a chain of secondary explosions as RO-105's own torpedoes detonated inside their tubes. A massive column of water erupted skyward, hundreds of feet high, followed by a shockwave that rattled the hulls of ships miles away. When the sea finally settled, the only evidence of the submarine's existence was an expanding oil slick mixed with twisted metal, shattered planking, and scraps of personal belongings, letters, clothing, scraps of life now lost. Captain Cato and all 55 men aboard RO-105 had been killed instantly. The destruction of RO-105 marked the end of a devastating campaign. In just 12 days, from May 19th to May 31st, 1944, USS England had sunk 6 Japanese submarines, a record unmatched in naval history. What made this achievement even more extraordinary was that England was not a fleet destroyer, but a modest destroyer escort, barely 5 months out of the shipyard on her first wartime patrol. Of the 7 submarines assigned to the NA patrol line, 6 had been destroyed, 5 of them by England's Hedgehogs alone. Only RO-109 survived that gauntlet, and even she would meet her end less than a year later near Okinawa. In those 2 weeks, the Pacific had become a graveyard for Japan's once proud submarine fleet, a testament to the deadly precision of Allied intelligence, technology, and persistence.
The astonishing success of USS England sent shockwaves through both Allied and Japanese commands, far exceeding the immediate tactical significance of her victories. When reports of her 6 submarine kills reached Washington, Chief of Naval Operations Admiral Ernest J. King personally dispatched a message to the ship's crew, brief but unforgettable. "There'll always be an England in the United States Navy." It was a statement that carried both admiration and permanence, an acknowledgement not only of the destroyer escort's extraordinary performance, but also a salute to Ensign John C. England, the young officer who had sacrificed his life at Pearl Harbor and for whom the ship was named. For their actions between May 19 and 31, 1944, the crew received the Presidential Unit Citation, an honor shared by only 2 other destroyer escorts during the entire war. The official citation praised their extraordinary heroism in action against enemy Japanese submarines in the Pacific War area, and emphasized that England's daring and precision had contributed materially to the success of our operations and upheld the highest traditions of the United States Naval Service. Lieutenant Commander W.B. Pendleton, the ship's commanding officer, was awarded the Navy Cross for his leadership throughout the campaign, yet those who served with him often pointed to his executive officer, Lieutenant John A. Williamson, as the true architect of the ship's deadly efficiency. Williamson's relentless training drills, tactical refinements, and insistence on perfect coordination had forged the crew into one of the most formidable anti-submarine teams in the Pacific. When he later took command of England, it seemed less a promotion than the natural continuation of a legacy he had helped build from within. The broader strategic consequences of England's patrol were not immediately apparent, but they proved decisive. The sudden disappearance of the entire NA submarine line led Japanese naval intelligence to a critical misjudgment. Believing that a major American task force had passed through toward the Western Carolines or New Guinea rather than the Mariana Islands, Admiral Soemu Toyoda ordered his fleet to redeploy in the wrong direction. That single error consumed both time and precious fuel. By the moment Toyoda realized the truth and tried to reposition, the American Armada was already ashore at Saipan. The invasion began on June 15, 1944, catching the Japanese fleet completely off balance. Days later, on June 1920, the Battle of the Philippine Sea sealed Japan's naval aviation fate. In what American pilots dubbed the Marianas Turkey Shoot, over 400 Japanese aircraft were destroyed from minimal Allied losses. 3 carriers went down, and with them, the last illusion of Japanese air superiority vanished.
From the newly captured Marianas, the U.S. now possessed forward airfields from which B-29 Superfortress bombers could reach the Japanese home islands, a turning point that all but determined the war's outcome. Despite the Navy's attempt to conceal the true scope of England's achievements to protect the secret of Allied code-breaking, the Japanese soon deduced the grim reality. Their own intelligence analysts correctly concluded that the annihilation of the submarines had been guided by American radio intercepts. Confidential Japanese memoranda even admitted that their signal security had been compromised. Yet, astonishingly, senior commanders persisted in believing that their main operational codes remained intact. This fatal complacency allowed U.S. cryptanalysts to continue reading Japanese communications almost until the final months of the war, guiding submarines and surface task forces to one ambush after another. The saga of USS England endures far beyond its wartime setting. It stands as a testament to the synergy of human intellect, discipline, and valor, proof that even a modest ship manned by ordinary sailors can change the course of history when united by purpose. In those 2 relentless weeks of May 1944, the men of England transformed from a routine escort crew into naval legends. Their story remains a luminous chapter in the chronicles of the sea, a reminder that courage and precision, wielded with conviction, can echo through history long after the guns have fallen silent.